My name is Jason.
My name is Judd.
And this is The Sixth Ring, a podcast about the Trophy tabletop role-playing game.
And today's theme is Dragon.
Setting out.
So, Judd, I know you wanted to talk about Trophy Gold, and in particular how Trophy Gold has affected how your players play other fantasy role-playing games.
Yeah, we started playing Five Torches Deep, which is, I think, a fancy way of saying we're playing a very stripped-down version of 5e. But they're also being really cool about playtesting weird ideas I have about experience point tables that look like bingo charts and all kinds of stuff. So it's been cool. And we've talked about how play culture is a big deal. And yeah, Trophy Gold has changed it. I feel like Trophy Gold has made answering questions and asking questions a big part of that Thursday night group's play culture. It's about 7 people, which is why I switched over from Trophy Gold to D&D.
That's hard in Trophy Gold.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate the game beyond 4 players. So, it gets really hard for me personally. I'm just not a GM that likes to GM that many people, you know?
I'm not crazy about it, and I said okay because I figured not everybody would show up. So I was like, well, we'll get about half that. And then it turns out that this is that one D&D group that just has 100% attendance almost every game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's cool. And it lets me play test some other D&D stuff. But yeah, the questions are the big one, I think. Players asking each other questions, players asking me questions. It's been really cool. I really have liked seeing that. I think maybe one of the players would have been asking questions anyway, but maybe not as aggressively. And now I feel like lots of people are asking lots of good questions, and it's just a really cool change. It helps everything. It helps take weight off of me because they ask each other questions. Yep. It helps take weight off of me in describing a room because I can kind of give something vague, and then they can ask clarifying questions to get an idea of really where they are and what's going on. It was helpful. It's just been really, really helpful. I've been thinking a lot about what you said about system matters, but maybe play culture matters more.
I was just going to quote myself.
Yeah.
That exact quote. I think it's an important statement because the groups that I play with, I know that we can sit down and play literally any role-playing game, no matter how crunchy, no matter how trad, no matter how indie, and we're going to have a good time because the play culture does a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that play culture means you're sometimes going beyond the boundaries of what the game's designer intended, or maybe you are playing in a way that the game's designer did not anticipate, but it is nevertheless still playing the game, and the play culture just does a lot of work. It just smooths things out.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Five Torches Deep, but I'm curious about Five Torches Deep specifically. You said it's kind of like 5e light. What's the appeal of that game?
I wanted to play D&D. I wanted something I could easily strip things in and out of. I have a D&D house rule thing, bunch of notes that are threatening to become a game. And I knew that this would be an easy way for me to sub in pieces of that and sub pieces out. Again, playing Trophy Gold helped clarify some things. There are some things I like and some things I don't. It was really helpful in clarifying my thoughts and making me think about what I want in that particular fantasy adventure game that I think of in my head as Project Ampersand. The ritual of the dice is another thing that isn't in our current game, and I would kind of like to be. I love that when you pick up the dice to do certain things, you have to say certain things.
Right.
Yeah, that's hugely important. It can really change your game. You know, if every time you pick up a 20-sider to hit in D&D, you tell the GM, this is how I'm using the environment around me. And then you roll, or just something that you want the players to do. Yeah, it's a huge thing. And we don't think about it a lot. And Trophy Gold does. It says, when you make this type of roll, tell the table this.
Right.
That's a big deal.
What I think Trophy Gold answered for me when I started almost exclusively playing it when it comes to just sort of standard fantasy adventure gaming, it sort of met me halfway in terms of what I want out of a system and how I like to run fantasy games. And when I kind of got back into fantasy gaming, Dungeon World was my thing. It was initially Burning Wheel, and then I moved to Dungeon World. And I think the attraction of all of these games, there's a sort of similar thread there for me. So for Burning Wheel, I loved the modular nature of it. You could take the various subcomponents of that game and mix them up to make your own subcomponents. I enjoyed that level of tinkering. And so that was really fun to me. Dungeon World introduced a different interaction between player and GM that I really loved. Via custom moves, still had the ability to sort of allow me to tinker to get the kind of experience I wanted out of a particular adventure. I eventually got so into this idea of like just wanting like a light system with a lot of space to tinker and play that I went to World of Dungeons for a long time. Like I probably was steady on World of Dungeons for like a year or two.
Right.
But the problem with that, what I was kind of running into with World of Dungeons, is there wasn't enough of a chassis. Like it was really wide open and fun to play with, but it's a GM's game. It's not the sort of game that like anybody could just pick up and have success with.
Right.
It depends so much on the GM to like bring something to it, right? I mean, John Harper, the author, literally says like, you're building on top of this.
Yeah.
It's meant to be built on. And I think what Trophy Gold did that has made it such a sweet spot kind of game for me is it is light. It has that space for me to do the things I want to do with it. But it still has a really, really strong mechanical foundation with the risk roll and the combat roll and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a big part of it for me.
Yeah. I can also very tangibly feel the things that I miss. I miss die results that are like success with a cost rather than a full success or a failure. Mm-hmm. I definitely kind of hand wave house rule that in, but it's nice when it's actually there. And I miss Devil's Bargains. They're important, and it's a cool way to just offer the player something, and everyone kind of gets to offer it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really subtle way to get in table authorship and kind of train everybody to be a GM someday.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's play culture, right? I mean, we've talked about that before. Like the Devil's Bargain, the risk roll in general, is like the main thing that's creating play culture and trophy play, right? Like it is it's just a different way of doing it. Somebody like on my YouTube videos like posted like, oh, I'm really enjoying this, but sometimes when you do the risk roll, it feels like it takes too long to resolve. And I kind of replied back with, well, yeah, that's probably true, but you have to consider the outcome too. Like once the risk roll is done, we are covering a huge amount of ground. We're covering a huge amount of ground in the fiction, and we're doing a lot of cool stuff like as a result. And it's more our story, right?
Yep.
That's my thinking on it.
Yeah. And the other like Trophy Gold thing I've brought with me, and I mean it's a Trophy Dark thing too, is just the structure of like moments, sets, monsters, traps, treasures, and the way it prompts you to kind of think like, hey, do the rules change? Like, is there any like special rule in this room or in this area? That's cool. It's just a nice way to kind of think about things and get things down. It's also easy to reference. It's easy to write, and it's super easy to reference and play. It's bullet point encounter design instead of paragraph encounter design. Just that structure has been super, super helpful.
It's a deconstruction of a dungeon. I mean, that's how my friend Garrett put it. Well, Garrett was talking about Trophy Dark. He said that a Trophy Dark incursion is like a deconstruction of a fairy tale, or like a sort of fairy tale adventure. And Trophy Gold's a deconstruction of a classic D&D dungeon. Yeah. It's a big part of how you interact with it. Well, that's awesome. Anything else you want to say before we move on?
The only thing, when I go back to Go Trophy Gold on other game nights, the only thing I think I'll miss is levels. I kind of like levels.
Yeah.
And I've jotted down notes to add them in. And it basically is one of those deals where it's like, yeah, you could house rule this. And it seems like it'd be easy, but it actually is like you're designing like advanced Trophy Gold, or you're making a new game, and I'm not quite ready to do that.
That's fair. It's the number one piece of pushback that I personally get on Trophy Gold. We've talked about granular character advancement, and people kind of miss that a lot. And I get that.
Yeah.
And, who knows? I mean, there might be some future version of Trophy Gold, or some hack that like adds stuff like that to it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go to the next segment.
Clawing for gold.
Today we're going to talk about a rooted in trophy game called Last Night on Earth. Last Night on Earth is an RPG by Kat Evans with artwork by Liz Gist, I think, or Gist, possibly. It's about a group of people who are becoming a monster. Either they suffered a werewolf bite, or they were tainted by some kind of mutagen, or bitten by a zombie, or so forth. And they have one night left to complete some kind of major goal called a burden that they all share. And they have one night to do it before they are destroyed, or they turn completely to their monstrous selves. Each character has an affliction that sort of determines their starting skills and powers, and they can gain conditions in a similar way to how you would in Trophy Dark. The game mostly follows the structure of Trophy Dark, but it has some mechanical and procedural adjustments to account for the kind of story it's telling. And so that's kind of a basic overview of it. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I liked from a read. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I did have a chance to read through it, and I know Trophy Dark well enough to know how this is probably going to play. But did you get a chance to take a look at it?
I did. I really liked it. It reminds me a lot of probably my favorite part of the World of Darkness games, which were preludes.
Yeah.
Which might have been holdovers from Ars Magica, or it might have been I went the opposite way. I brought preludes into Ars Magica from World of Darkness. I don't remember what the evolutionary bit was there. But yeah, it just reminds me of a World of Darkness prelude, which was always my favorite part. I loved that part of the game where you kind of learn a little bit about the character, either when they were mortal or right before they became a vampire, right as they became a vampire or ghost or whatever. And it's just cool to have that game in your pocket for when your friend says, I used to play World of Darkness games all the time, and I'd really love to play a game. Do you have anything that you think would be cool?
Exact thought.
And it's perfect for that. It's just, it's so nice to have that kind of game in your pocket where you can just take it out and go.
Yeah, I had that exact same thought. It's not convenient to pull out vampire or werewolf for those people, but you could definitely pull this out.
Yeah.
Some things I liked. I did appreciate that this game has quite nice artwork and layout. It looks really finished and done, which I think is great. Kat has a great writing style. Very, very nice economy of words. I think lots of writers write long paragraphs but say nothing. Kat's writing is very clear and spare and contains a lot of information. I've actually worked with Kat on a couple of other projects, and so I already knew this going into it, but just want to kind of emphasize it here again. There is a beautiful economy of text. It's not much to read. I mean, it's 32 pages, but it's a lot of stylized layout there. It's not much to read, but it is absolutely dense with usable information. I think that's important. And yeah, kind of like you said, this is a complete game. I mean, you don't need Trophy Dark or any familiarity with Trophy Dark to pick this up and play it. Everything you need is right within the text. I think that's pretty terrific.
Piggybacking off of something you said, the font choices and the layout is really crisp, and the fonts are big. Kat has made it really easy to read. They just did a great job of each area being really clearly delineated so that in play, while I was GMing this and 100 things were happening, I'd be able to look down and pick out a detail. And it's something that I notice in a lot of, I've been looking at a lot of Wizards of the Coast books lately, and the font is super small. And I've been making my own random encounter tables, and one of the big things I've been doing is just making the damn font bigger because I just want to be able to read it.
Right.
And
yeah.
It was a trick that a friend of mine taught me who was an assistant DA when I was in undergrad, and we gamed together. Javon said, don't make the font small because in a stressful situation, you won't be able to pick it out off the page. You want that font bigger so that you can find it. I love GMing, but it also is, I don't want to say the word stressful, but it can be fast. And so you want to be able to look down and pick out things fast. Thank you, Kat, for making this very readable.
Yeah, I agree. The whole game has a nice appreciation for the facilitator of the game. There's a lot of GM facilitator support, which I appreciate. For example, the section, it has a before you play section. I've been a long time advocate of the idea of properly setting expectations at the table before you start playing. And that's not just safety and content. It's what are we going to be doing? What is this game about? And perhaps ironically, my favorite technique is called CATS. But I can tell when the author has thought about the experience at the table. And I think games that have thought about that, have thought about expectation setting, and have thought about the GM's experience read so differently than ones that do not. And this one really does. And I think they did a really great job at that. There's a lot of good advice on how to actually write a last night, which is what the game is. This game's version of incursions. It's really similar to a Trophy Dark incursion. It has terrors and temptations and moments and all that stuff, but it has just some little adjustments to sort of account for its modern day setting and to make the journey more about time rather than physically moving to the center of a space as you would in Trophy Dark. So I really appreciated that. And there's a really nice example too of what one should look like.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I'll say about why I think this is worth picking up, it has some really smart adaptations and additions to Trophy Dark. The inclusion of a combat role makes a lot of sense, right? You can't do combat in Trophy Dark, but here you can. And it makes sense because the game has a different orientation. It's not about hubris and failing, right? Which is what Trophy Dark's about. It's about striving to accomplish something desperately. And I think that's a difference. And so combat is is tonally appropriate to that.
Yeah.
And so I like the inclusion of a combat role. It adds the new help role, which some of us have been playing with. That's something that's not in the original Trophy Dark or Trophy Gold rules, but it's being added to them for the final books. And the help role is terrific. And it changes the concept of ruin to time. And so it's not about your character becoming more a part of the forest or the castle or the incursion or whatever. It's more about like how much time do they have left before they are not able to do what they want to do, right? Like before they succumb to whatever is making them a monstrous thing. So I just think Kat did a really, really terrific job.
Yeah.
This is a great, smart, streamlined, and focused Rooted in Trophy game. And I'm very, very here for it. It has its own thing to say, but it still very much honors like what Trophy Dark is. And so I'm very happy about it.
Cool stuff, Kat. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll have a link to this in the show notes. Let's go to the next segment.
Into the Forest Dark.
In the last episode, we kicked off a discussion about converting OSR and old school modules to Trophy Gold. That's been my focus this year in terms of my own personal play. And so I'm happy we're able to kind of like gradually sort of unfurl these ideas on the show here. In that last episode, we talked about some big picture stuff, and in particular, how you should focus on big ideas rather than granular details. In this episode, I think we should talk about some strategies for dividing up the physical space of a dungeon into sets. So I have done about 5 conversions so far this year, both writing the conversion and playing through them. And the first thing I always have to decide, or at least I find myself having to decide, is how to actually divide up the physical space. Now, writing set goals is a separate topic and maybe something we'll talk about next time. But for now, I want to just kind of focus on the geography of the adventure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome.
I'm hearing you.
So I think as a general matter, a good strategy is to find the places in the adventure where the environment changes or where the geographical transitions are clear. So if the adventure moves from, say, a village to a set of nearby ruins, that's probably a good place to mark off a division. If it then moves to above ground ruins to a series of below ground catacombs, that's probably a good place to mark off, like, okay, this is a different area. If there are a series of chambers dominated by an underground river, you might mark a division where the river is no longer something the characters have to contend with. The key to me is just where it seems like there are transitions in the geography. Now, I don't think that's necessarily where you make your sets. I just think it's like where you start, because you might decide that some of those places should be subdivided into other sets. But at the outset, I always find myself looking at the maps or looking at the flow of things or the various like places that the characters have to go to and making decisions about, okay, here's a transition, this is a distinct thing. And usually those things end up being their own sets, but sometimes they end up being more sets, which I'll talk about in a minute. Does that make sense just at the outset?
Yeah, it does. I have a feeling in the years to come, as we start looking at and taking apart these modules, we're going to have to start to catalog them a little bit and like have different types and also figure out like different techniques for deconstructing them and making them into Trophy Gold things. And I think mapping out the physical spaces into sets is probably most often going to be the easiest thing to do.
And it's kind of the first thing you have to do.
Right.
I've done different approaches where I take the module. I usually will read through it completely before I do that. But after I've kind of read through it, I'll sometimes do this approach where maybe I'll do some fast monster conversions, or maybe I'll see if there's a magic item I can change into a Trophy Gold magic item. But what I find is that I start asking myself lots of questions, and there are lots of unanswered things whenever I start with those other kinds of details. And those questions always go back to, what is the set?
Right.
And so you kind of have to start there when you're doing these conversions. You kind of don't really have a choice because everything flows from the set.
Yeah.
And before you even get to the sets, you need to figure out the geography of the space and where you want to make divisions, where sets might be. I want to use the Maze of Nuramen as an example. Now, the Maze of Nuramen is a starter adventure for Blueholme. I converted it most recently, and so that's why it's on my mind right now. Listeners, if you're listening to this, it might be helpful to have a copy of Maze of Nuramen. I don't think you necessarily need it, but it could probably enrich your listening experience. So the first part of that adventure is about negotiating with a group of wood elves at the Wood Elves camp. And that's a terrific place to sort of mark off a division of the space. And indeed, I made it a set because it has its own idea. It has its own like little particular role in the story. It's a prelude to the dungeon. And so that was a good place to sort of start.
Nice.
And then the adventure assumes you're going to journey through some woods before you get to this village called Law's End. Now, the woods is another great place to possibly have a division and maybe even make it a set. I skipped it in my conversion because of time. I didn't think I'd have enough time to do the woods journey. So I went straight to Law's End. So my initial division is the Wood Elf camp and then the village of Law's End. And then the village, Law's End, sits above the actual Maze of Nuramen. Right there, the transition from the Law's End to the Maze of Nuramen, another great place to transition, another good place to like mark off and say, okay, here's another division of the geography. From there, we have this transitional portion, which involves going down a deep shaft and crossing a large underground river before you get to the meat of the dungeon. That whole sequence is probably, you can kind of handle that in different ways. I made the shaft and the underground river like its own thing. You could probably divide them up to two separate things if you wanted. But in any case, it represented another transition, and it's sort of like the thing that happens immediately before you get to the actual dungeon proper. And so that's kind of what I mean by this. Like, you sort of look at where does the module assume the characters are moving through, and where are the transition points, and that have that be where you kind of mark off your divisions, and most likely those are going to be sets as well.
Interesting. Is there anything that you looked at in this and you were like, nope, snip, that's out of here?
Well, the woods thing, I cut that.
Okay.
The module assumes you're going to have like a little forest journey in between.
Got it.
Talking to the wood elves, and I was just like, I liked it. The reason why I cut it for time, so it wasn't really like there wasn't really like a substantive reason why I cut it.
Got it.
But I've definitely done some of these other module conversions where I'm like, this is not so great, right? Like maybe I'll just like not have this. But you know, that you just have to kind of make those decisions for yourself.
Yep.
I think the next thing you have to consider is once you have marked off those logical transition points is whether those divided up spaces need to be further subdivided before you can make them into sets. There's another dungeon that I ran recently called Prison of the Hated Pretender, and it's just a tower with 4 stories. And so that division is really easy. Like, each of the 4 floors is marked off, and because each of them is fairly small, just a couple of rooms, it's easy to make them each a single set. So it's nice and clean.
Right.
Maze of Nuramen is trickier because there are only 2 levels to the dungeon, but each is huge. There are like a dozen or more chambers. And so I was faced with the initial issue of like, how do you divide these large dungeon levels up? And maybe you don't, but that was my initial problem, I guess.
I could also see a type of deconstruction where, because I listened to the Fear of a Black Dragon episode this morning, and that tower could also be one set is the tower during the day and one set is a tower at night.
Yes.
It is a possibility, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so listeners have the right context, Prison of the Hated Pretender, that tower functions differently at night than it does in day. And I think that's a good idea. I think like when you're making set goals is probably when you sort of like get more into the nitty gritty of like what's actually in the space, you know, and how we're going to interact with the space. So far in all my conversions, that has come secondary to just this idea of like, what is the physicality of this space? You know, like how are we looking at this physically?
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. That's a good example of like how you might approach the situation a little differently. So talking about Maze of Nuramen and these big like 2 dungeon levels. First of all, kind of like you just said, maybe you don't need to divide them up, right? Like maybe they can just be their own sets. This is particularly the case if all of these spaces in the dungeon are unified by a single idea. You know, it might be okay to have just like one set be a whole level of a dungeon. You know, Jesse says that in the rules for Trophy Gold. Most likely, though, you're probably going to want to divide it up, especially if it's a big space with no real defining theme or idea. It's just a bunch of chambers with traps and monsters, which happens to be the case with Maze of Nuramen. If Maze of Nuramen has a theme at all, it's old D&D, you know, like there's not really like much unifying idea there. Well, there is, I'm not being totally fair to it, but it's more about classic dungeon crawling and encountering classic monsters, right? You might want to divide it up. I think there's a few ways you can do it. I think a simple geographical division works really well. Okay, the north part, the east part, the west part, the south part. A more interesting physical division is looking for the parts that are hidden behind special doors and secret doors, or that are not easy to reach because of traps or monsters. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit more subtle, but I think maybe even better.
Cool.
There's some dungeon where there's like a checkerboard passage or something. If you step on the wrong tile, something happens. Is that Tomb of Horrors? I don't know. It's a trope anyway.
Yeah.
It's a trope where you have to cross this like checkerboard corridor and not step on trapped panels.
It reminds me of that old CD cartoon video game. What was it? Dragon's Lair?
Oh yeah, it's
definitely in theme with this episode. So it's you're on theme.
Right. Yeah. Glad you worked that in there. But that corridor, that sort of like classic like trap puzzle corridor, the other side of it is a great place to put your next set. So just another way of thinking about the physical space is like not necessarily like, northeast, southwest, but more just like what's hard to get into. What's the next part that you have to kind of struggle to get into? Maybe, okay, that's the next part.
Mm-hmm.
So Maze of Nuremberg. So when I was doing that one, I was fortunate that the first level of that dungeon has some big ideas going on in various parts of it. So dividing it up sort of thematically was easy. But it was also aided by the fact that those big idea sections are also neatly divided in physical space too. So I made the central hall, the dining hall, the kitchen, and the armory all one set because they were, one, close to each other, but also because they are the sort of the parts of the dungeon that are in Nuremberg's day were like the public parts of the dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
I made the northerly portion its own set because, first of all, it's behind a puzzle door, and second of all, it's all about Nuremberg's experiments. And then I made the sort of far southerly portion of the first level its own set because, one, it's distinctly separated from the rest of it, and two, it's about Nuremberg's private life with his family. So sometimes thematic ideas and physical space link up helpfully. But you can do it either way, I think.
So do you let the hunt rolls decide when the wandering monsters come by, or do you add in a different kind of subsystem, or is it depends on the flavor?
Yeah, it depends. I did have a wandering monster in Maze of Nuremberg, which I just ran last week, and it was a gelatinous cube.
Nice.
They weren't ready for it. It walloped them good. The way I justified putting it there was they did get a poor result on the hunt roll.
Uh-huh.
And then I just looked at the table of wandering monsters and decided, okay, there's something terrible is going to be one of these wandering monsters. So that's something you can do. I try to adequately telegraph the monsters before just hitting them with the monster, or at least giving them a chance to escape before they fight the monster, or at least make plans before they have to fight it. But yeah, that's basically how I do it. Yeah.
Cool.
I guess the last thing that I want to say here in my little discourse about this is I think you should also consider the big story beats in the dungeon. Now, this is kind of getting away from physical space a little bit, but if there are any final boss encounters, that's a great place to mark off a division of the space and make it into a set. In my experience, yeah, that's the best thing to do. So like final boss encounters are a great one. I kind of already hinted at it with like sort of prelude encounters too, like the wood elves or the ruins of the village or whatever, right? Story beats are important. And I think that's all I've got to say about this. Did you have any other thoughts or questions?
No, it's cool. It's going to be interesting to see how this process changes as we get to different dungeons.
Yeah.
And also different philosophies of dungeon creation. Because the OSR is going on a very different... When you get Tomb of the Serpent Kings or an OSR dungeon, especially the stuff that's free or on blogs, and the stuff that's for sale, you're going to get a very different vibe than you're going to get when you try to translate a D&D of the various editions and philosophies.
Oh, absolutely. The vibe and the structure is always changing too, right? Even within the OSR.
Right.
I would say that the popular OSR modules from even a few years ago are really different than the ones that are coming out now.
Right.
But I think it's also important to, like, at this point, yes, I think our approach is always going to change, but also there are certain fundamentals that are never going to change, especially when it comes to converting modules to Trophy Gold. Theme is a big one.
Yeah.
How you write set goals is a big one. I hope we get to talk about that stuff next time. I do want to say this, though, before we leave this segment. Tangential, adjacent idea. But I should mention that my conversions are fast and dirty. I do not do the entire process that Jesse works out in the Trophy Gold rules. That process is cool. It's thorough. And you could probably, like, sell it or share it afterwards, right? But I just do like a fast, dirty conversion with just enough notes to make sure that I can do it. And I think that's the key. Your conversion needs to match like your pace and what you're capable of doing. And so if you feel comfortable converting monsters on the fly, I do, then you don't even have to worry about that part of it, right? Like you can just, in the moment, you can worry about that. If you feel comfortable using the keyed locations and their descriptions from the module in conjunction with just like, okay, I shared the set goal with you. Now what do you do? And they go and search and you sort of use the text of the dungeon. If you're comfortable doing that, you may not have to write many notes about the actual dungeon itself. You could just basically write down set goals and you're good to go. And that's more or less all I do. But not every GM is going to have that level of comfort. And so engage with it at whatever level you want that's going to make it to where you feel comfortable running it. I think Jesse's procedure in Trophy Gold is like the maximalist approach, right? Like it is a full ass conversion, right? Like written down, structured a certain way with tables like you would in a regular Trophy Gold incursion and all that. And it's great. And it's a good starting point if you want to sort of like not do something so detailed, but you want to at least pick up on the principles and the ideas. You only have to do as much as you need when you're running the module. In any case, well, so that was good. I hope, I know we're going to be able to continue this conversation in future episodes, listeners, and I hope you're finding it helpful. Let's move on to the next segment.
Woven on the loom.
Okay, we're talking about dragons.
Yeah.
Dragons. Different aspects of dragons, I think. Judd and I have chosen to focus on different things. Judd, what do you want to talk about?
I like yours better. I got really strange and just started thinking about how I might do a Dragon's Lair. The dragons in the Trophy Gold game I was running were pretty normal dragons, but I think you can also get really weird.
Yeah.
You can have a dragon that's sleeping and its lair is the players getting drawn into its dreams.
Oh.
And what does that mean? I think you could also get into cool, Trophy Dark stuff where the game begins as soon as the players kill the dragon, and then it's like, oh, now you're the monsters trying to get out of here, and none of you are going to make it because you're monsters who just killed the dragon. So I think, I don't know, I just started thinking about different ways to do it, and it was interesting. I felt like a lot of my ideas were leaning more towards Trophy Dark than Trophy Gold, which is not what I expected when I proposed the theme. I thought I was going to make up a Dragon's Lair or something, and that isn't where my notes went at all.
Makes total sense to me. I consider the lair of a dragon, in fantasy adventure gaming at least, to be like a classic liminal space.
Yeah.
The moment you begin the journey into their lair, it's like things change.
Yeah.
It changes in ways that are different for both the characters and the players, in my opinion. For the characters, they experience the way that the dragon's magic changes the space. They know that they're going to have to face the dragon and they may not survive. They know that it's a liminal space in the sense that if they succeed, they're going to come out so much wealthier than they were when they started.
Right.
And so the Dragon's Lair exists in a very special place in fantasy gaming. And I think it's true for players as well, because we've had this idea hammered into us that the dragon is a particularly special encounter. It's a particularly noteworthy thing. The oldest game in the game, has dragon in the title. And so that's also like an interesting aspect of like the dragon encounter. It's like the player's expectations of what it's like to face a dragon. Like every time I would do a dragon in Dungeon World, it was always the encounter the players were most excited about and most scared of.
Yeah.
Like they were simultaneously, it was the one they were very excited about, but also very concerned about their characters dying. I think it's appropriate to think about the lair of the dragon in a different way than you would. And I think there's really something to be said about like reinterpreting.
Yeah, absolutely. I just started thinking about that and different ways you could do it in this game and this system.
I was thinking about dragons in terms of age because this is the one thing I always remember about dragons in D&D. Okay, so I started with 2E and I had the Monstrous Compendium, and the Monstrous Compendium has, like, the dragon section is by far bigger than all the rest. It has individual pages for each of the various dragons, metallic and chromatic and so forth. And then it has like a bunch of pages even before that talking about their ages and like how that mechanically like comes into play. And so I was just kind of like hung up on that idea of how as a hobby, we've always been kind of hung up on the idea of the age of the dragon. My thought was if you wanted to go this route, my ideas here are not like fully formed, ready to run monster stat blocks, but just sort of like maybe how to write one is, okay, so an immature dragon or a young adult dragon, say, would be endurance 10, and their defenses are their breath weapon, and they maybe have one magical ability connected to their element, fire, electricity, whatever. If you defeat the dragon, you roll gold dice for their carcass as normal, plus once more for their horde. Once just because it's probably a modest horde for a young dragon. And then as the dragon gets older, say to an adult age, it becomes endurance 11. The defenses are their breath weapon again. They have 2 magical abilities now, and they also have a new defense that reflects that their scales have become harder. Okay. And then you would roll gold dice 3 times in total after you defeat it. And then you'd have like ancient dragons at endurance 12. Their breath weapon is probably amped up in some way. Maybe it does more damage. Maybe everyone has to take an extra weak point when they use it or whatever. You then have 3 magical abilities. Their scales are very hard, maybe only penetrable by certain types of weapons. And then you roll gold dice 4 total times once you defeat it. And then I could think you can go even one step further for dragons that are particularly powerful, old, or noteworthy in the setting. Think Smaug. They would stat just like the ancient dragon, but they have endurance 13, meaning you have to learn their weakness in order to have a chance at killing them. Again, Smaug, maybe you learn about the part of his scale that's exposed, right? The like missing scale. And so that was kind of my thinking on how you could like play with the idea of like dragon age, which is a trope of dragons.
Yeah. I love it. And I think the other thing that I would put out there for folks who are playing Trophy Gold and are thinking about dragons is they don't have to just show up when the players tromp up to their lair. Like it can be a failed hunt roll when they're out traveling. It could be something that they could find a field full of dead sheep who have been electrocuted and eaten, and their bones are left. I had the dragon that was in the mountains around in the game we were playing so that the players kind of knew it was there. And I think that can add to the holy shit factor when they finally like, you know what, fuck it, let's go get it. Let's go get this thing. Great stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, little chat about dragons over. Let's go see what Wodoom's up to.
Desperate and doomed.
Okay, the last time we saw Wodoom was attending a feast in the upper floor of the Huntsman's Manor. Wodoom was invited by Catherine to attend the feast, and you had the set goal of to quite simply enjoy the feast. And so far that means raising a toast to Tyrolus and the mannequins who are under siege in Tyrolus. And you learned that the servants in this great feasting hall are other mannequins, but of a different make than you. You got to overhear some chatter. You got to see some people eating in a very feral manner. Lots of conversation, lots of stuff going on. I pointed out a few things that I'll remind you of as we start playing. But the main thing is Catherine came up to you and said, hey, there's a fortune teller. Let's go get our fortunes told.
Right? Yeah.
And so we're going to pick up with that.
Cool.
There's actually a line to see the fortune teller. And the fortune teller is sitting at this table that has a black velvet cloth draped over it. The fortune teller, it's a woman. She's also wearing a sort of black velvet gown that's been embroidered with silver stars and moons, and she's wearing like a veil over her face. And she's doing tarot card readings using the sort of standard tarot deck in the setting, which is a deck of the various saints, the sisters. But you're in line, and the end of the line where you're at right now with Catherine is very near what I described last time, which is this, there's a dais, and atop the dais there's a door. And all around the door, there's no walls or anything. It's totally exposed. It's just a door. But the door is shaped like a wolf's face. And on the other side of the door, there's a spiraling staircase. But there's literally nothing, as far as you can tell, to prevent you from just walking around the door and going up the staircase. It's unclear what the door is doing.
Right.
So, but you're very close to that, though. Like, you're right there.
I'll nod towards it and say to Catherine, what is that?
I think I want to handle this via hunt roll.
Cool.
Because you're asking questions about the world.
Yeah. Awesome.
1 die just for doing it. 2nd die if you have any, if you have a skill that you're using. Or a piece of equipment, weirdly, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's just 1.
Go for it.
3.
No hunt roll token, and you encounter something terrible.
Yep.
She says, oh, that door, well, it leads to everything, doesn't it? The Marquis Nirol has been engaged in a hunt for over 100 years, and we are here with him. We cannot leave until he satisfies the hunt, until he catches his ever-elusive prey. And those stairs beyond the door, they lead to the hunting grounds. You will be asked to join in the hunt, but not by me. The Marquis will find you at some point, and the Marquis will ask you to join him in his endless folly. And I'm afraid you don't have much of a choice in the matter.
What did you say when the Marquis asked you?
The Marquis can be a very convincing man. I said yes, but I had even less choice than you, and you have almost none.
Did you help him, or were you hunted by him?
No. No one here, no one in this room is the quarry. No, the quarry is special. I shall not speak of it, so as not to ruin the surprise. But let's just say that the hunt changes you. Even you, a mannequin, even you will be changed by it. There is something about the scent of blood on the air, the particular way the environment changes when an animal is fleeing for its life. It changes you.
I'm going to go up the stairs. I would like you to come with me.
No. You must wait. Wait for your invitation. And then she sort of like smiles a little bit and says, although I can't really stop you, can I?
Yeah. And I think he gives like a little like nod bow as if like goodbye, and walks through the wolf's mouth door and goes up the stairs.
So we'll back up a little bit.
Yeah.
As you walk off, she says, I'll hold your place in line.
Nice.
And as you approach the door, so it's like a wolf's head and then the door is inside the wall.
Yeah.
You said you were going to try to go through the door and then go up the stairs.
Yeah, definitely.
I think as you reach for the door, you hear someone call out to you, "Hello, friend!" The person calling out to you is a man, well-dressed, very like fine hunting clothes, hunting leathers, sort of trimmed with velvet, handsome. He's bounding over to you right now. What do you do?
I say hello as I continue to reach for the door to open it.
The door opens. No problem.
Yeah.
Do you step inside?
I do.
When you step inside, it looks very much like it did before, except this time, the spiral staircase seems to go up. You don't even see the end.
Right.
You just look up, and it just goes up and up and up and up and up until you can't see the top of it anymore. And this man who's standing on the other side of the doorway, as you've stepped in, he says, "You look anxious for the climb?
I'm anxious.
What do you hope to find up there?"
Catherine said it will bring change.
Yes, it will. The hunt brings change. The stairs just bring exhaustion.
Are you the Marquess?
I am indeed. The Marquis Nirral, at your service, and he sort of like gives a half bow.
Yeah, I give a half bow back and say, I am Will Doom.
I know your kind. They haunt these halls in their way, though I have never known one of your kind to be so independent, self-starting.
I have never seen a human quite so stuck as you. It seems you are stuck in this situation for a long time. One hunt for 100 years?
You have still not seen a human so stuck as me. And he says, the hunt will begin in 1 hour. It's best if you go up with us. I won't stop you from trying to climb the stairs, but I will tell you that the hunt does not begin until I drop the flag. And I'm not going to go for another hour at least. I have far too much conversation and drink to look forward to.
I was like looking up the staircase, and then I turned back to the Marquess and kind of just stare at him and try to get some, I don't know, there's something that happens when you are a faceless mannequin and you just square up on someone and look at them for a long time until they get uncomfortable. And I'm just kind of seeing what he does. Does he like take it as a threat? Does he not take it as a threat? Does he take it as
make the hunt roll?
Yeah,
make the hunt roll.
I'm going to use persistence as a...
I love it. Yeah, it's good. We've seen this trick before.
Yes, I've done that one more time, but this is a little different. 6.
Nice. Take your token.
Cool.
The longer you stare at him, He's staring back. The more you begin to sense that this is an illusion. He is not just the man you see standing before you. You know he is a wolf. How do you know that?
Yeah, I know that because of the way he does a couple things. I think he, there's like a low growl in his throat when I make this weird eye contact. And I think he also looks at other wolves around him, like as if to gather his pack to him. I think like Catherine's one of them, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Catherine will say, "Come, Ward Doom. Let us have our fortunes told. We're nearly at the front of the line."
Cool.
The Marquis says, "It was very nice to meet you, Ward Doom, is it?"
Yes. Nice to meet you, Marcus.
"I hope you will return within the hour and join me for the hunt."
I hope so too.
And he goes off laughing with some companions.
Cool.
Catherine gets to the front. She's ahead of you in line.
Mm-hmm.
And the fortune teller shuffles the cards and spreads them out. And here, this sequence is meant to have multiple player characters, but since we only have Ward Doom, I'm going to have you roll for Catherine and her fortune.
Okay.
So you're going to roll 1 light dice and 1 dark die.
Got it. Dark die is 1, light die is 2.
Okay. She pulls the card depicting Saint Tori. It is a woman beneath water, her hair sort of floating. So that's the first card.
Nice.
And the fortune teller says this to Catherine. "This card represents the past, and importantly, it represents hidden depths, the unexplored. I see that you are someone who used to live a very deep, rich, full inner life, but now you have reached a point where your life is just, well, let's see." And then she beckons Catherine to draw the next card.
Cool.
Roll the dice again.
5 dark, 3 light.
And here I need to know also, which one's physically closer to you, Jed?
The 5.
So that means that the card is reversed when it's drawn.
Neat.
And it is Saint Clarice. It's a picture of a woman's robe around a female glass figure. The fortune teller says, "This is Saint Clarice reversed. It represents the horror of being seen or shame. You were a woman who used to live a rich and complex interior, even intellectual life, but now your current circumstances find you a woman living in terror, perhaps even ashamed of what you used to be, or perhaps trying to escape what you've become. You are perhaps ashamed of what you are now." And Catherine is sort of like nodding along, not really confirming or denying anything.
Mm-hmm.
The third and final card represents your future. Go ahead and roll the third dice.
Yep. 1 and 6. 1 dark, 6 light.
And which is closer?
The dark.
Okay. This is Saint Carissa of the Dark Sky, reversed. The card depicts a woman standing below an ominous cloud, reaching her hand up to meet a bolt of lightning.
Nice.
She says, "Reversed, this card represents a vainglorious struggle. You are going to try to escape this place, and I'm afraid, my dear, you are going to fail." And Catherine clenches her jaw and turns to you and says, "I don't know how much use I have for fortune tellers. Why don't you go?"
Nice.
Roll the dice for your first
Dark and
card.
light. It's cocked. 5 dark, 3 light. The 3 light is closer.
She draws the first card for you, and it's blank. Draw again.
3 dark, 1 light, and the dark is closer.
She draws a second card for you, and the card is blank. Draw a third card.
This is pissing Ward Doom off. 5 dark, 6 light. The dark is closer.
She draws the third card, and it is also blank. She gathers up the cards, says to you, "I'm sorry," and then gets up and walks away from the table. And we'll end the session there.
Oh, he's so pissed off. That's awesome. Cool.
Listeners, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed The Sixth Ring. The Sixth Ring is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website, it's gauntlet-rpg.com. We're on Patreon. If you'd like to support this show on Patreon, we always love that. It's patreon.com/gauntlet. Hey, maybe you're not able to support financially. It is also very helpful if you rate and review the show on iTunes. We love that as well. Judd, thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a lot of fun.
And Rich, our editor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, listeners. Take care. Hi listeners, I want to let you know about Codex Starlight 2, the newest issue of our indie role-playing game magazine, coming to the Gauntlet Patreon feed in early March. Codex Starlight 2 is one of the biggest and best issues yet, and it features Snipe Hunt, an original game inspired by movies like Red Dawn and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in which a teenager takes a group of kids out into the woods for a snipe hunt in order to protect them from a calamity taking place in the town they live in. Bed, Breakfast, and Beyond, a one-shot hack of Brindlewood Bay about an elderly gay couple who run a bed and breakfast trying to figure out why guests keep disappearing from room 3. The Temple of the Peerless Star, a trophy gold incursion inspired by the dungeon made famous in the Discern Realities podcast and later published for Dungeon World in the original Codex Starlight. We've taken the core of that dungeon and expanded it for trophy gold, and it's great. 36 more Signs the Stars Are Right, a miscellaneous sequel, 7 original illustrations, and a custom layout. You can get Codex Starlight 2 in the Gauntlet Patreon feed in March by making a $6 pledge. That's at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.